Hi, everyone. So I figured because one of your readings for this week is slides instead of the actual text pages that I would make, a quick video just kind of walking you through some of these slides. I let someone borrow my book, Preventing Misguided Reading, which happens a lot actually once people find out, what an amazing book it is. So I need to get it back from her and start making some copies for y'all. But add that to your list of books that you definitely need to have within your classroom, preventing misguided reading. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and go through these. You can see the very first slide is the last one from a couple of weeks ago. The authors of this text are the ones who introduced to me this idea of really looking at kiddos and the way that they read as either being print dependent, meaning dependent, a balance of the two integrated together, or difficulty in both print and story processing. So that's that first one there. So just kind of thinking again, when we're listening to kiddos read, when we're thinking about reading instruction, we're constantly thinking about trying to have an integrated, self-extending system of a kiddo who can independently read without you, and that they can process print and story together. So this week, looking at guided reading, um, guided reading has really adjusted and changed and transformed over, the past couple of decades. Um, so what these next couple slides are going to look at is what a common guided reading model used to be and what Berkins and Crofts, the authors of this book, what their understanding of guided reading is. So when we're thinking about the introduction, um, traditionally a guided reading model had the teacher present, here's the book, here's a quick summary of the text. They may have done a picture walk with a small group. They picked out a few key vocabulary that might be crucial for the students to know before they begin reading, and then they would set a purpose for reading. So very teacher directed. Berkins and Croft, when they think about the introduction for a guided reading lesson, they're supporting students in figuring out what the kids already know. So they may ask questions like, well, what do you notice when you look through this book? Already notice that shift of who's doing the work in that introduction. The kiddos are. I mean, the teacher is still there to support and guide and facilitate, and that teacher may offer a specific summary or vocabulary words, but notice it says if students do not notice those key elements. The thing that I think we forget sometimes is if a kiddo doesn't do it with us in guided reading, they're not going to do it independently when they go off to read on their own. So that scaffolding of their learning is a really precarious position of how much we are doing for them when they can actually do a lot of it on their own. All right, let's look at student practice. Traditionally, when we're looking at traditional guided reading model, the teacher is listening to individual students read the entire text as the kids begin practicing reading, and that teacher might offer some prompts that help students, key in to whatever source of information they're missing. So then that will go well with next week's analysis of running records. So again, it's very much the teacher. Berkins and Croft thinking about guided reading, the teacher is still listening to individual students read that entire text, but their prompts are more general. And again, it really requires the students to engage in the work of problem solving. So in the past, I've seen, teachers say, oh, now does that make sense? Or does that look right? Or look at the beginning of that word that you missed there. And again, it's a lot of the teacher doing the work. Perkins and Croft are saying, you can still offer prompts, but let's look at some more general ones that really have the kiddos doing the problem solving and not you doing the problem solving for them. And you'll see that last bullet, the teacher might administer a running record, which in my opinion, every single lesson, a teacher needs to be administering a running record on one child on a familiar text, just to constantly be listening to how kiddos are reading. The teaching point in a common guided reading model, the teacher would directly instruct to clarify a source of confusion in the text. So if there was, the teaching point would come out of where the kiddos were confused. Perkins and Croft say that teaching point doesn't necessarily need to be around what happened wrong. Let's reinforce what went well. It's so powerful when you watch a child read in a guided reading group to their teacher and they come across a word that's tricky or difficult and they problem solve it. And then what's even more powerful is for the teaching point time, and once the students have read independently, the teacher saying, "Hey, L'Aquarius, share what you did when you got to that tricky word." And L'Aquarius gets this boost of confidence of, yeah, let me share with everybody else. I'll tell you exactly what I did. And the kiddos are learning from him too. Problem solving, what you did well, not always just what went wrong or what you didn't do well or what the kiddos were confused about as they were reading, really reinforcing what went well. This last one, instructional reading level, this is something that's been echoed in a couple of things that we've looked at or listened to. Um, Commonly, Marie Clay defined 90 to 94% word recognition accuracy on a running record as the instructional reading level. So for a group of kiddos to be reading a text in a guided reading group, that if they're reading about 90 to 94% accurately, that's the instructional reading level for them. Perkins and Croft adjust that. They look more at a higher word recognition accuracy, 95 to 98% even. And then keeping in mind comprehension needs to be there as well. And freedom from tension. Y'all, that freedom from tension is the same thing as we were talking about with cognitive load. If a child is struggling through a text, to the point where they may be getting 90% word recognition accuracy, but in your teacher gut that this book is not providing the cognitive space they need to really cement that strategic processing system, then that's not the book for them in an instructional guided reading group. So some people look at this 95 to 98% and they're like, wow, that's high. But in reality, it's really not. If you were to read a text that I put in front of you right now at 95% accuracy, believe me when I say it would be, a little frustrating. Not frustrating, but it would be an instructional kind of text for you where I would be able to teach you a little bit of something. So just keeping in mind that, we don't want kiddos to feel tense or overloaded or frustrated in a guided reading group. We don't want you to feel that way either. The nice thing about this book is that it is organized around strategies, and it's not strategies for kids, it's strategies for teachers, which I just love because so many reading texts talk about, here's the strategy to teach this child or this child. This is for teachers. This is honing in on your craft as a literacy teacher. So the first four strategies are grouped around the idea of working through the tricky parts of guided reading because there are some tricky parts. You can see strategy one is similar to what we looked at a few weeks ago around how guided reading is not the only time that we are teaching literacy. It is not the only time that we are teaching reading. So looking at read aloud, shared reading, and guided reading and independent reading, looking at how to be consistent in how we are presenting reading, this, constantly focusing on problem solving, showing kiddos, even in shared reading, what it can look like when you problem solve. I really want to focus on the guided reading piece here. Typically, guided reading lessons are teacher directed lessons. They carry those students through a text that is too difficult. And it's not that it's too difficult for them to read. They might be able to read it, but it's too difficult for them to integrate that print and story without heavily relying on the teacher. I've always said if I watch a guided reading group and I feel like the teacher is way more exhausted at the end of it than the kiddos are, that text was not the appropriate to choose. The kiddos should be the ones working, and that's the point of exhaustion. But by the time their 20-minute guided reading lesson is over, their brain should be like, wow, yeah, I just worked. And the teacher shouldn't feel exhausted at all. A consistent guided reading lesson is going to be facilitated by the teacher, and it's a session. It's where they're all together working. Kiddos are actively integrating. They're problem solving. The teacher is documenting how they're problem solving, supporting as necessary, and reinforcing the great things that kids are doing as they're problem solving. And look at this part. Some teaching points she's going to take back and address explicitly during shared reading. Maybe that reading teacher, he's going to say, you know what? I saw that they did this, this, and this. I think I'm going to bring that into my shared reading lesson tomorrow, strengthening that connection across all our reading. Describing guided reading as a session. So thinking about the idea that instead of a lesson where the teacher is directing the work, it's pre-planned. I've talked to you guys about how I detest guided reading lessons that are pre-planned regardless of whether the kiddos need it or not. It's just a curriculum that we're following day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Um, and it's just where the teacher's talking a lot the whole time. A guided reading session is different. The teacher's a facilitator. She is not the main story of that session. The kiddos are. She's responsive to what they need. It's very conversational, and instead of hearing the teacher all the time, you're hearing kiddos read. And the teacher's there as needed to support or to reinforce, but it is not a teacher heavy kind of thing. Strategy 3 is establish routines that require students to assume control. This is something that was tricky for me as a beginning reading teacher. I really wanted to get my finger in their book. That's the best way that I can describe it, is that if a kiddo was reading to me, I'd have my finger right in there, pointing for them, covering up parts of words to help them chunk. And I realized, wow, I'm really showing them that I don't believe that they can do it on their own. So establish routines that really let them do it. Have them turn the pages. And yes, you would be surprised at how many teachers turn pages for students. We don't even realize we do it. Give them a thumbs up after they've problem solved. Have them turn, and retell to a partner. And then teaching students in guided reading groups only when it meets individual needs. This is where the analysis of their running records is going to be crucial because that's where we find what their needs are. Guided reading is most appropriate for helping kiddos establish that self-extending reading system where they are balancing print and story. It's appropriate for them to practice and extend those strategies, but not all students always need to participate in a guided reading group in the traditional sense. Some kiddos might actually have more of a shared reading kind of small group because they need more teacher support, more teacher facilitation, more teacher directness. Some guided reading groups can be built around a reading process instead of levels. If I see that, student A, B, and C are all heavily print dependent, but they're not in the same level, I can still pull them for a guided reading group with books at different levels and say, all right, kiddos, today when you're reading, we're really going to focus on, what makes sense. You're looking at the print, but let's think about what makes sense. And, some kiddos won't need guided reading at all. They'll just be in book club or in literature circles. So guided reading is not something that is needed for all kids, only when it meets those individual needs.